Alright, so today we're going to go over dart frog nutrition. Some of the topics we're going to cover today is why dart frogs are toxic, what they feed on, how we feed them, and why we feed them what we do. So to start off, to answer a question that's most commonly asked whenever people are figuring out what or how to care for dart frogs is, are they toxic whenever you keep them in captivity? And the short answer to that is no. Now, I'm going to get a little bit more in depth on this. So, the reason that dart frogs are toxic in the wild is because of the alkaloids that they receive from their prey. These alkaloids are responsible for their toxicity, and these are what cause, and this is also one of the reasons why dart frogs are so colorful. So, to state a direct quote from Understory Enterprises, they acquire their toxins called alkaloids from a very specialized diet of ants, millipedes, and mites that themselves feed on a very special diet of rainforest fungi and plants found in their natural habitats. Whereas captive dendropidae frogs feed on pet store diets of non-toxic fruit flies, crickets, and springtails. So, the reason these dart frogs can't produce these alkaloids is because what we feed them is vastly different from what they'd be eating in the wild. There's tons of microfauna that would constantly be available to them in the wild that they could always eat. So that in and of itself, just from a nutrition standpoint, is why they cannot produce these toxins, which therefore would make, which would allow them to harm potential predators. That's also one of the reasons why they're so colorful. It's because they, over time, they develop these vibrant colors in order to warn predators or potential predators of their toxicity and not to eat them. That's why, especially with some of the larger morphs, like dendrobates, is they don't really know that they're not toxic, so they're very, very bold dart frogs. They know that if you were to eat them in the wild, at least, you would become very sickly or even die. This also feeds in why we should not handle dart frogs, because while the toxins that the dart frogs produce are a defensive mechanism that allows them to survive, it also, once stripped away from them, it also does not defend them against other things that would potentially inflict damage on them. So, like, for example, your hands. Your hands have tons and tons of oils and other things that can harm the dart frog's delicate skin, and that's why you shouldn't handle them. It's because these toxins would be a first line of defense for them. There was a smuggling out of, I believe it was Colombia, and one of the people who busted the shipment, I think it was, took part in stopping it, or I think actually received the frogs, was the owner of Tesoro State, Colombia. I can't remember his name, but whenever he went to go handle the dart frog and try to move them, because one of them actually escaped from its holding container that it was being shipped in. It was an Fuga Lamani, I'm pretty sure. It actually gave him almost burn-like rashes, and it was extremely toxic to his own skin and it inflicted great pain upon him. They can't do this in captivity, and that would be the first line of defense. So again, we're actually doing more damage to them than they would be to doing to us if we were to pick them up in captivity. Now, I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm advising it shouldn't be done, just for the reasons of the dart frogs and health. Obviously, if you had to move them or you had to get them out of some place or to transport them, if you had to, like there was no other option, if you had to pick them up or move them someplace or just kind of handle them out of necessity, that would be fine because it's not going to kill them. Wouldn't be the best thing for them again, but you just have to be careful about that. So now we're feeding in captivity to keep our frogs healthy. As stated before, the dart frogs are feeding on tons and tons of microfauna in their natural habitat that would be constantly available to them. In captivity, they don't have this. Best case scenario, we'll have a couple springtail cultures in the tank, some sort of isopods, they'll feed on the babies, or maybe if we have dwarf whites, they'll feed on those directly, and then we have fruit flies. That's it. So it's important to make sure that we give them a proper diet and proper nutrients because they don't have access to all these things. Especially since obviously they can't reach these potential prey items they would in the wild, obviously. So what we feed these dart frogs are fruit flies. So there are two main species. There's Drosophila melanogaster and Drosophila hydae. The hydae is the larger of the two species, so they're a little bit more finicky to culture, but that's what you feed your larger dart frog species. So your Dendrobates, your Terribilis, like Epidophates, larger Fulgi, Histronica morphs. You'd feed your larger dart frogs, larger flies, of course. And then, for example, the smaller of the two, Drosophila melanogaster, is what you'd be feeding to your thumbnail dart frogs. So you'd be feeding those the Ranotomea, the Fuga Pamilio Escudos, and smaller species, maybe like froglets of the larger aforementioned species. Things that obviously they can't eat and take down bigger prey items. So, yeah, that's what we do mainly with feeding them. And you may have a couple of springtail cultures running on the tank, which the frogs may feed on. It's not a bad idea to replenish those or even introduce those in the first place, every couple weeks or months or so. And just make sure there's a little bit in there, just for them to kind of pick off and snack on. So that brings us to nutrition, and supplementation. So the second question, obviously, and what started this video, is what do I feed them? And again, they don't have these access to the nutrients they would in the wild, so it's our job to supplement their food and make sure that they have access to this. Obviously, what we're feeding them is vastly different from what they'd be feeding them all. Most of the time we're feeding a lot less. So whenever we're feeding our fruit flies, which are the staple, we need to supplement them. There are tons of different supplements that you can use, and a lot of them serve the same purpose. Most of the time you want to get something geared towards dart frogs, and that'll just be your best bet. That provides, most of the time it covers the base supplementation, and then there's obviously specialized things that you can feed in order to help them. The most common supplements, or animal supplements that are just kind of, you feed them like whenever you feed, most on a daily basis, are Dendrocare, Ronavet, Bionarium, Repesci, I think it's their vitamin A. There's a lot of others like Birkin, Vital, there's a bunch of European companies produce these supplements. A lot of these will contain a lot of the important nutrients that dart frogs need, such as calcium to stop diseases such as MBD or seizures. MBD is metabolic bone disease. They'll produce some of the stuff like carotenoids will boost color. Vitamin A is an important one. Sometimes stuff can be anecdotal, like saying it'll do this or that. But the important thing is that they're getting those nutrients. They're getting those vitamins they need. So just feeding flies alone is not a good idea, just for the sole reason that the flies don't produce, the flies aren't a source of the nutrients that our frogs need to eat, especially on a regular basis. So the second thing on this is how much to feed and when to feed. In an ideal world, you'd be feeding tons of times a day, little amounts, but that's not possible. That's not realistic. The point of caring for the point of trying to provide optimal care is not always trying to do every little thing that they would have in the wild. It's, for example, a wolf is consuming like elk and bison. They're hunting in packs. A dog is not going to have access to that. We're not going to go take our dogs hunting for deer and let them in packs. That's just not what we're going to do. It's the same principle with dart frogs. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that on a regular basis. So what I do is I feed every day and I rotate my supplements. So currently I am feeding Dendrocare, Ronavet, and Carotenoid Plus. The Dendrocare is its own separate company, and Ronavet, Carotenoid Plus, Carotenoid Plus and Rana A are under Renarium, the Renarium's line of products. I feed Dendrocare the most, and then Ronavet second, and then every week or two I'll feed Carotenoid Plus, and every month I'll feed Rana A. Those are just the instructions on it, and I think that our frogs are getting plenty of nutrients that they need, and I think that they're actually pretty healthy feeding this. And I'm aiming for around 15 to 20 flies per frog, and I'll feed every day. Least amount of times I'd feed a week, I would say you could get away with 4. 3 would really be pushing it unless you're feeding really heavily. And again, I'm feeding a smaller frog. I'm feeding Renitzmea benedicta. They're much smaller species, so I don't have to worry about dumping flies in the tank and constantly have to buy fruit fly cultures. So it's pretty easy feeding them. You just dust supplements on them, and you just pop them in the tank. Make sure that you don't want a lot of dust in the tank. If it gets in there, it's fine. It's not going to kill anything. But you want to be cleansely. It's also, whatever you're creating is also kind of beautiful, like, because you have all these plants growing in there. But now we're getting off topic. So again, an easy thing to do is, especially when you first get your frogs, throw 20 flies per frog in there, or maybe just estimate. That's a lot. That sounds like a lot. It is. And just see how many left the next day. If you don't know how many are left the next day, maybe add a banana slice in there, let it rot for a couple days. And if you see a couple flies hanging around there on the banana, I mean, you're doing a pretty good job. If you see tons and it's practically becoming a fruit fly culture of its own, then feed less. If you don't see any flies on the banana at all, you might want to add in a couple more flies per feeding. Especially if you're going to feed over prolonged periods of time. So that pretty much covers everything I want to talk about in terms of dart frog nutrition. There are tons of things you can feed in a variety of manners. Especially if you have a sick dart frog or something that's kind of skinny, you could feed for example, fruit fly larvae, which is super super fatty. If you're having if you have really big Dendrobates tinctorius like citronellas, or your terribilis and they're just massive frogs, you can feed bigger stuff like pinhead crickets. I just gotta be careful with those because those might bite your dart frogs. I actually saw a video by Troy Goldberg. I highly recommend you his channel out. It's Troy Goldberg's Tropical Garage. He actually fed spiders to his terribilis, which is crazy to watch. They're just chowing down on these spiders, and they're very aggressive feeders. So, in terms of feeding your frogs, don't worry about if they're gonna feed because they're going to eat, especially if you're providing enough food. Just worry about their nutrition and making sure that their needs are met. It's not that difficult. It sounds kind of jarring at first. It sounds like it might be a little bit of a challenge, but it's really not. A single fruit fly culture will last you about a month and a half, especially if you're not feeding very much. The flies themselves, they don't really smell. They'll smell if you're just completely a waft your nose in there and you just get in and get in. You'll smell it. It's hard. I mean, if you're watching and you're being careful, it's hard to dump the flies all over your floor and get them everywhere. And especially if it's if your house is cold or something, they're not going to live very long. They're not going to be able to reproduce. But again, it's not too much to worry about. It's pretty easy to feed your frogs and feed them correctly. Just the key takeaways from this video, I'd say, are feed the right fly. So make sure you have an adequate food supply. Make sure the frogs are getting those nutrients. So make sure you supplement. And finally, just kind of enjoy it, because it's a lot of fun to watch your frogs hunt these flies down. You'll see them chasing them, and it shouldn't be looked at so much as a chore as much as it is some source of enjoyment. You'll watch these frogs go after these flies and hunt like they would in the wild. And to me, that's the most rewarding part about all this, is watching your frogs be frogs, watching them be wild, watching them acting how they would in the wild. That's the goal. That's what we try to do whenever we create these vivariums and just try to feed them. We're trying to create something that will be close to their home, but we can have it in our own home. It's our own slice of jungle. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and thanks so much for tuning in. I'll catch you on the next one.